Hi, it's Alistair at Electric Scotland, just doing the introduction to my weekly newsletter for 5th of April 2019. Of course, April 6th is Tartan Day in the US and Canada. And of course there'll be Tartan Week going on in New York, because it's usually a whole week of events, which is also, I think, the Sunday's the big parade in New York with the pipes and everything. And usually they've got Scotty dogs. And I think there's an event on in Toronto, I think from the Scottish Studies Foundation, with the Scot of the Year. I don't know who that is at the moment for 2019, but I dare say we'll find out more about that shortly. Okay, well, let me tell you what I've put up for you this week. First, on to my Life in Scotland news, I put up a wee article I got in from Boston, Massachusetts, which to say the National Trust for Scotland Foundation USA successfully collaborated with Scotland's largest conservation charity to crowdfund the restoration of one of Scotland's most picturesque mills, where some of Outlander's most memorable scenes were filmed. So I've given you a bit of a background to that, and that's a good story. Also under my news, I've given you another wee story, which is why doesn't the US military like working with the British military? I was quite intrigued when I saw that, actually, and I thought, oh, let's see what that's about. And actually, I rather liked the story, so I thought I'd replicate it for you. And so I put it up on the site for you to have a read. Okay, then on to the news stories we've got for you this week. The first story is long-term security risks from Huawei. The Chinese company has been strongly criticized in the report by the body overseeing the security of its products in UK telecoms. We've been hearing about these problems from various countries in the world, but this is the first report I've actually seen from the UK, so I thought it might be of interest for you to have a wee read at that. It comes from the BBC. Next story is another one from the BBC. It says, schoolboy finds lost piece of Glasgow's Govan Stones. A 14-year-old schoolboy helping out at an archaeological dig in Glasgow has found one of a set of lost gravestones from the Middle Ages. His discovery of Govan Old Parish Church led to 2 more sculptured gravestones being found, and some good graphics there as well. Then another one from the BBC is mobile barbering. It's like Uber, but for haircuts. And I thought I'd feature this because it occurred to me that, there could be a new business idea here for some people out there that can do haircuts. Instead of waiting for people to come to you in the shop, you might go out to them. So I just thought it was an interesting wee story. So I thought I'd put it up for you to have a read at. Then, for the EU, Brexit presents a big security dilemma. This is actually a CapX article, which as you know, I rate CapX quite highly. And following that, it says the EU's censorious copyright directive will create 2 internets. It's today's approval of the European copyright directive is the end of the internet as we know it. And really, as we all use the internet, you should really read that, because it's going to make you have a wee think. Then, next story is World's Press lambasts Britain for failing to leave the EU on intended date of 29th of March. It says newspapers in Europe and across the globe have been reacting to Friday's withdrawal agreement vote. so that you see what other people think of us from around the world. Then I've got another BBC story. It says Scotland's Orkney Islands produce more clean energy than their inhabitants can use. The next step, hydrogen. Here's why that matters and what the rest of the world could learn. So I thought it was a very interesting wee story there. Okay, the next story is Canada heating up faster than the rest of the world. Canada's changing climate report claims the country is 1.7 centigrade higher today than it was 70 years ago. And of course we're hearing about like the Arctic might just lose all its ice for about a month in the year, so that's got all kinds of implications. Next story is celebrating 70 years of NATO. This is an article from the Scottish Review, which, as you know, I also rate highly. It's the alliance is still as vital as ever, it says. The one from the Scotsman is Glasgow Doner Kebab brand to launch 100 sites in Saudi Arabia. Woo hoo hoo hoo. Of course, I used to enjoy a doner kebab back in Scotland, certainly. I think it was the sauce that they offered with it. It was a bit spicier than you get in Canada. Okay, 16 sweets that'll make you feel nostalgic if you grew up in Scotland. And I must confess I remembered all 16 of them. So, there are nice pictures of them as well there, so I thought you might like to read that story. It says Scotland's love affair with all things sweet is well known. And it's no surprise that we have a rich history in not just keeping them for ourselves, but also in producing some amazing treats for people around the world to enjoy. Then the next story is in defense of the Trump tax cuts. This is actually a CapEx story, which is partly why I put it up. It says Democrats seem intent on reversing a part of the Trump agenda that is actually working. So again, you might want to have a read of that. Amazon plans to launch satellites to offer broadband internet. It's got amazing implications. This Amazon just seems to take over roles, you know, but it says Project Cooper will launch a constellation of low Earth orbit satellites that will provide low latency, high-speed broadband connectivity. So I thought that you might like to read at that. And finally, working with Jerry Corbyn on Brexit is a big mistake. This is another CapEx article. And by the way, the previous article on Amazon came from Reuters. So Theresa May's red lines were there for a reason. So they're not too chuffed about the working with Corbyn, but we all know May's flawed anyway. She needs to just go. She's terrible Prime Minister, it really is. Worse than our history. And it's all of her own making. I mean, her negotiations were just appalling. I don't understand. The British MPs are just appalling as well. Or most of them anyway. You know, it's just that I don't understand why members of Parliament can't understand that they're better to make their own decisions than have them forced on us by the EU. I mean, how humiliating is that? But they seem to like to be humiliated and cast aside as irrelevant, and that's what we're getting. We won't have any say in any of the rules in the EU with what they want to do. In fact, I think it's time we got the SES snipers out and started to shoot a few of these Remainers. Kenneth Clarke, I think May, she'd probably get a bullet in her head as well. You know, Philip Hammond. These people are just traitors to the country. And if they get their ways, Britain will be totally diminished. It's just mind-blowingly stupid, the whole thing. Anyway, I don't know. maybe I won't say they should be shot, that's not really right to say, but you know, you just feel at times that just take them out. Let's get on with this. Okay, now on to Electric Canadian. I'm saying just as Brexit is dominating British politics, the SNC-Lavalin scandal is likewise dominating Canadian politics. And if you're watching British politics on the news, you get nothing but Brexit. And if you watch Canadian mainline news, you get nothing but this SNC-Lavalin affair. Brexit is only a minor mention. It's just, it's pretty terrible. It looks like the Liberal government and Trudeau are likely to lose the next election because of it. Okay. I've added the Canadian, sorry, I gave you a link to a wee bit about it, so that if you're not aware of the situation, you can read a wee bit. There's an interview with one of the MPs. Canadian Archive reports. I've got up the 1902 report, and I've also got up volume 19, 1896 of the Canadian Horticulturalist. Bureau of Archives for the Province of Ontario. I've got up the 6th report. It's by Alexander Fraser in 1909. Then I have New Studies of Canadian Folklore. I think Canada, being a new country, wouldn't have any folklore, but it's got folklore, all right. And you can read about it at the link I give you. Then 160-year history of the Canadian Gazette. I've added a link on our magazine's page, so that anytime you want to read about the Canadian Gazette, if you go to my magazine's page, you'll see a link which will take you to the actual website. And so on the website, they give you a lot of the old issues online. Sam Steele of the Northwest Mounted Police. I've had a video biography of him. Quite a character for sure. I've also found a video of Grey Owl. Grey Owl is the kind of famous so-called Indian that was harking back about good preservation of lands and all kinds of good things like that. And they found out afterwards he wasn't Indian after all, he was actually the chap from England. But nevertheless, he did some really good work, and this video tells you a bit about him. Then the Canadians. Again, because I picked up a couple of these biographies, video biographies, I looked into it a bit further and I found there's a whole collection of some 59 Canadian video biographies. So I've added a link, a video link, on our Makers of Canada page, where in theory if you go to the first video, it'll go on and offer you all the others. So I hope you enjoy that. And enjoy they're all about 45 minutes in length. Next I've got for you is the new Makers of Canada, John Walker Grant McEwen. John Walker Grant McEwen was a Canadian farmer, professor at the University of Saskatchewan, Dean of Agriculture at the University of Manitoba, the 28th Mayor of Calgary, and both a member of the Legislative Assembly and the 9th Lieutenant Governor of Alberta. MacEwan University in Edmonton, Alberta, and the MacEwan Student Centre at the University of Calgary, as well as the neighbourhoods of MacEwan Glen in Calgary and MacEwan in Edmonton are named after him. So a really interesting person. And again, I've got a video for you to watch. Then Driven by Fortune by Sam Allison. It's a story of the Highland Scots in Canada, which you can read at, and I provide you with a link. actually, the link goes to our community page where there's a video of him talking about his book. So I thought you might find that interesting. And then the final article is the Scots Canadian. It's the newsletter of the Scottish Studies Society in Toronto. Basically, I've added a link to the page because I've got a few copies of the Scots Canadian on the site, but I've added a link to that page where you can actually go to the Scottish Studies Foundation page, where they've now put all the past newsletters of the Scots Canadian up online for you to download. So that was a good resource, so I wanted to bring that to you. And there is a wee article from Conrad Black saying, "The absurd delusion goes up in smoke at last." Obviously talking about the Trump situation. So that's Electric Canadian for you. On Electric Scotland, I put up the volume 32, July-October of 1898 of the Scottish Review. Lots of good stuff in there. Life and Death on the A9. Again, I've mentioned I use this TiVo service with Kojiko, where they give me access to YouTube, and I'm just discovering a whole pile of really interesting programs on YouTube that I didn't know existed. I hadn't even heard of them. But as you know, I maybe highlighted several weeks ago one about the A1, which is the main road from London through to Edinburgh. Well, this is Life and Death on the A9, which is the Perth to Caithness route. It's the main road there. So I thought you might like to watch that. It's obviously about Scotland, and you get a nice lot of look at the Scottish roads and stuff like that there. So, Best Newfangled Family Tree, I've got it in the April 219, section 1, which you can read at her normal page, and I'll give you a link to it. She was actually highlighted in that one, the book I put up about the heraldry, because she's saying the crests in full colour are just beautiful. Okay, James Melvin is the next one I've got for you. He was rector of Aberdeen Grammar School and the best Latin teacher in Britain. We've added him to our significant Scots section. I've given you a link to that. I hadn't heard of him, and having read about him, I must confess I should have known about him. Okay, then Traditions of Strathglass. I found this book because it was mentioned in a book about Chisholms, and it mentions how the book about Chisholms took quite a bit of information from these Traditions of Strathglass. So I thought, interesting. So I thought I'd go have a look and see if I could find Traditions of Strathglass. In fact, I couldn't, but what I did find was that the Celtic magazine in 1881 put the whole book up in 11 parts. So I found the Celtic magazine, extracted the 11 parts, and put it together into one PDF for you to read. And there's a lot of great information in that, so hope you enjoy that. Fair bit of work to put that together. Then a history of the University of Aberdeen from 1495 to 1895. So 400 years history there. It's by John McCallum Bullock and was produced in 1895. So if you're interested in the history of universities, that might be a good read. Then History of Phrases of Lovat. Now, I must confess, I thought I had that up, but I don't. But I've obviously sorted it. It says with genealogies of the principal families of the name, to which is added those of Dumbalach and Focape. It's by Alexander Mackenzie in 1896. So for phrases out there, that would make an excellent read. Then Scot of the Year Award. This is the account annual award which comes from the Scottish Studies Foundation in Toronto. I noticed some gaps in our listings, so I've done some updates up to 2017. So I've given you a link to the page. So I think there's about 6 years that we didn't have the year mentioned. So I've found out who they are, and I've now added a bit for each of them. The story Kendall's. I didn't know Kendall was a Scottish name, but it says with historical and genealogical records of Scottish and allied families by Anne Kendrick Walker. So I thought, well, I'll grab that and put that up because that'll add to our store of knowledge. Then Folklore Journal. I've added volume 3 of this collection, and you can find it at the foot of our page at the Waifs and Straits page, which it contains all the folklore that we've got. And we've got a ton of folklore, I might add. And then finally for Lecture Scotland, I've got I Can Sketch and Draw. Some of you remember when Donna Flood would send us in lots of interesting information on her time in Oklahoma and with the Ponca Indian tribe, and sharing some of her native Indian lore. Well, she got in touch with me this week to say that she's put together a wee PDF file to help children learn to draw, and she's given us a copy to put up on the site. So as I looked through Donna's stuff on my site, I noticed that I've got an arts and crafts page, and under the arts, Donna's already contributed quite a bit about lessons about drawing and ways to think about things. So I thought I'd add that to under that list of chapters that she sent us some time ago. So all her art stuff's kind of together there. So I'll give you the link to it so you'll be able to have a wee read. It's not terribly long, so you might like to print it out and perhaps give it to some kids that you know, or a family with a lot of kids. Might help them draw and whatnot. And then the story this week is some old farming customs and notions in Aberdeenshire. It's by Walter Gregor, who's a well-known historical author. And it's just one I picked up from one of the magazines and thought I'd extract it and OCR it up for you. Lots of wee stories, kind of interesting. And it's like, you know, on no account must the spinning wheel be carried from one side of the house to the other during the time of Christmas. Woohoo! And considering Christmas wasn't really celebrated in Scotland till the 1950s, I think it was, so it was very interesting still talking about Christmas back then. So interesting wee things that come out there. Okay, so that's basically it. As always, I'll put a link to the newsletter where you can get all the links to all these stories if you want to read any of them, and hope you do, and I hope you'll comment and let me know what you think. And remember, if there's anything you're particularly looking for and we don't have on the site, let me know and I'll see if I can find it. Okay, well, thanks for listening, and have a great weekend when it comes. Cheers, bye bye.